So back again, World of Info, and we'll be starting. Hello.
Hello, sir. It's a great pleasure to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Rahul Kulshreshth, the Ambassador of India in Cairo, a man with a great experience in international relations from a degree from New Delhi. He served in the embassy of his countries in US, Russia, Ankara, Bhutan and Egypt before that as a DCM, and he was the ambassador in Ankara recently, and now he's serving since July here as a distinguished ambassador in Egypt. A great pleasure, sir. Thank you very much for coming. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you with us on air, sir.
Thank you for hosting me on your show this evening, and my greetings to all your listeners.
It's a great pleasure to talk about the magnificent India, a country that has had strong ties with Egypt since the pharaonic times, as we have found out through the historical scribes, but very recently in the medieval periods, Egypt was the agent of all the Indian spices and beautiful cloths to go through Egypt during the medieval period, during the Mamluks' time, and strong bonds and ties of friendship and coordination between Egypt and India since centuries, and lately during the modern history of Egypt and Egyptian-Indian relations during Nasser's time and Nehru's time and Indira Gandhi. Definitely we had a very strong ties. India, with the youngest, largest population in the world, is going to be the largest country, populated country in 2023, exceeding the China, and yet until 2070 it will be the youngest, largest population. People who are young, strong, and have a lot of ambitions, and probably a great education. We'll talk about the magnificent India with His Excellency, and nobody better than him in Cairo to talk about that. India, which is a subcontinent with more than 1 billion people of different ethnic and religious backgrounds, and yet they are living in harmony. This is a difficult question to ask. How was that possible, sir, for such huge population to live in peace for all these years and become prosperous?
Well, India is a country that is built upon a civilization that has been fundamentally tolerant. The civilizational outlook in India is best described and informed by a Sanskrit phrase which is found in our ancient texts, and that is Vasudev Kutumbakam, which means that the world is one family. And alongside that, unity in diversity has been a theme central to the Indian way of life, to Indian civilization and Indian culture. You're absolutely right. India is a land of amazing diversities. In fact, it's been described more as a continent in terms of the range of diversities that are there, not only religious denominations, ethnic denominations, but also language, customs. It may surprise your listeners that one estimate is that there are over 1,500 languages and dialects in India. Each region in India has its own cultural traditions, and these are still very much visible today. Plurality, therefore, has come very naturally in India, and along with that, tolerance and respect for differences, assimilation, amalgamation. And it is largely due to these traditions that despite all the differences, the cultural differences, despite the fact that all major religions of the world are represented in India and in large numbers, despite the number of languages that are there in India, people live in harmony. Secularism, for instance, is enshrined in the Indian constitution, and certain rights such as freedom of religion, right to equality, cultural and educational rights, these are fundamental rights under the Indian constitution. Furthermore, I would say that the political system, we are a democracy, we are the largest democracy in the world, has been participative enough to allow everybody to participate in the political processes of the country, regardless of religion, race, creed. And I think it is a combination of these things which provides space for everybody in India, regardless of whether it is people coming from one religious faith or another, and that applies to other aspects as well, irrespective of what language you speak or which region of India you come from.
Mm-hmm. And I think that Gandhi is considered to be the godfather of the nation, a man who helped very much to make a modern India a reality through his tolerance, through his education, and through his understanding that the use of force will increase the condition or worsen the condition in trying to remove the British colonization out of India. So Gandhi, as a father of modern India, how Indians look at him today? Is he still the founding father and still has a big place in their hearts?
Well, to most Indians, Mahatma Gandhi is simply the father of the nation, or the Mahatma, that is the holy soul. Last year on 2nd October, we launched the 150th birth anniversary celebrations of Mahatma Gandhi, not just in India but across the world and including in Egypt. And people from in all countries have participated very enthusiastically in these celebrations, including in Egypt. We've done seminars, we've had shows by eminent Egyptian personalities, lectures. So what it has brought out is that Gandhi's message and ideals transcend national boundaries. In India, I would say that besides that, people regard Mahatma Gandhi as the father of the nation. I think people see that his sole force was a moral factor that goes beyond ordinary politics, ordinary nationalism. Mahatma Gandhi was also unique because he combined multiple causes. So just as he advocated freedom from the colonial rulers, he said that the movement should be non-violent, which mentioned. He also talked about social reform, including women's emancipation, the upliftment of the downtrodden, and even sustainable living. So people identify him also depending upon which cause they are espousing. And I think that broadens his appeal, including to the younger generation.
And I had my own personal experience in visiting New Delhi last year in the fall, and visiting the home of Mahatma Gandhi was really a very special experience, to see how this man was living in a very humble life, a very clean and beautiful house, but still I was very touched to see that history was in the making in this simple place, and that unfortunately he was assassinated in this place, where the markings of the assassination are clearly marked for us, the final steps of Gandhi and his final peaceful words to the whole world, that people should live together and they should live in harmony, which was a heavy price that he paid with his own life, and accepted that his life would be changed for the prosperity of the country. So this still motto of Gandhi is still living among Indians up till now, right?
Yes, very much so. I think there is conviction that what he said, that irrespective of your differences, you need to resolve them through peaceful means, and you should not resort to violent methods. And I think that is something which is really of relevance across the world today. We see all kinds of very heinous acts of violence being committed for one cause or the other. Yes. And and against that backdrop, we take Gandhiji's message of non-violence and peace, tolerance, harmony, and we cannot but come to the conclusion that what he said remains equally valid today. I may also mention that even in his lifetime, and this was well before India became independent, I think Gandhi had become a source of inspiration to people in several other countries who were then struggling for their independence, fighting for their independence. I'm sure you'll be aware that on his way to London,
he stopped here in Port Said, yes.
His ship stopped here in Port Said. He was not, of course, allowed to come. But he was greeted very warmly by the Egyptian people.
Yes, and Saad Zaghloul have exchanged with him a lot of letters, and there was a kind of admiration and friendship that has raised through the handwritten letters between the both leaders. Both of them believed in the Non-Violence Act to remove the same enemy at that time, which is the British occupation, because they thought that trying to defeat that militarily will cause great sacrifices on the human level on both sides and parties involved. So I think the friendship that was between Saad Zaghloul and Gandhi is something of a great caliber, right?
Yes, it forms an integral part of the relationship between India and Egypt.
Yes, of course. Before we go to the important relation between India and Egypt, especially in the 50s and 60s onwards, we have to talk about another great man, a man of words, but a man of honor, a man who was able to win a Nobel Prize in literature at the times of extreme racist movement against him, and people even who won this prize before him made a mockery of his winning, and that I mean Tagore. He remains as one of the greatest poets and philosophers, with elegant prose and humanitarian mind that affected the mankind. How far does his legacy remains in the hearts and minds of Indians of today, as far as we have seen during his lifetime and afterwards?
Rabindranath Tagore, or as he's still called in India, Gurudev, is recalled and remembered and celebrated as a literary giant who also enriched humanity. He was a master of several literary forms, and I think that was well recognized in the Nobel Prize that he was awarded. He was also a very prominent personality in India's quest for freedom, and so there is his political legacy as well. He advocated freedom from British rule, and his writings inspired Indians in that period to join the freedom struggle. Tagore at the same time was an internationalist. One of his grand projects was to try and bring the East and the West together so that humankind is served better. I think from Japan to Egypt, some of the pan-oriental solidarity ideas that came about were influenced by Rabindranath Tagore's writings, by his vision. It may perhaps be of some interest to the listeners today that Rabindranath Tagore visited Egypt twice, in 1878 and I think 1926, if I recall correctly. And I think just as we talk about the friendship between Mahatma Gandhi and Saad Zaghloul
in 1926, he was lucky to meet him.
He visited Alexandria and Cairo, and of course interacted with very prominent Egyptian personalities, and developed a close friendship with the poet Ahmad Shauqi.
Yes,
he also sent an eulogy on the death of Ahmad Shawqi.
Yes. Ahmad Shawqi is a prince of Egypt, of Arab poets, and a distinguished man of a great nature, and definitely it was a very beautiful friendship between two giants of literature, right?
And equally interesting, I think Rabindranath Tagore's legacy is also unique in that he not only composed the Indian national anthem, but the national anthem of Bangladesh has also been written by him.
Yes, and he was an artist and painter in his final
Yes, absolutely.
years.
He was an artist and painter, and he established a university that still remains, Shanti Niketan. And of course, he was very close to Mahatma Gandhi, and he was the one who, in fact, gave the title of Mahatma to Mahatma Gandhi.
So a great man, a contemporary of great people, who left a legacy and still surviving up till today. And I remember then when I was in my short visit to India, New Delhi, I found that his books are everywhere, and small abstracts of his poetry and his prose and his life has been well demonstrated and purchased by a lot of people with great respect to Tagore, a great poet who was also a Bengali as well, right? So you have Bengalian roots, and definitely a very interesting idea of having developed the two or written the two anthems of two countries.
And it is said that his works provide a window into the soul and mind, and for that reason alone, his works, his poetry, novels remain relevant and continue to be read very widely.
Yes. I mean, there's more to talk about the Egyptian Indian interaction. We talked about Gandhi, we talked about Tagore, and more about India and Egypt, but after the break.
Yes, back again. Word of info, and you can call us at 2578-9407.
These breaks.
Yes, back again. Word of info with His Excellency Ambassador Rahul, Kulshreshth, Ambassador of India in Egypt, Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor of Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. This is Word of Info, and we're with you until 5 o'clock, so stay with us, and you can call us at 2578-9407.
So we're talking about Egyptian-Indian relations. We talked about the Tagore great visit and his encounter with the famous Ahmad Shawqi, and of course we talked as well with His Excellency about Gandhi and his encounter and the writing letters in between him and exchange of letters between him and the great leader Saad Zaghloul, especially with celebrating nowadays in March the almost 100 years of the 1919 revolution, the revolution of the people. So we have a very important period, the 50s. This was the start of the nation, or the rise of the phoenix. India as a nation has had its final independence in 1947. Fortunately, Gandhi's stay was limited by his assassination, and came to him one of his partners in the struggle, a great man by the name of Nehru, a man who had a strong relation and ties with President Nasser at that time, and a strong chemistry of friendship that has raised between them, and they founded the non-alignment movement. So both of the countries were the pillars, the grand pillars of the non-alignment movement, which started in 1955, and a strong relation of cooperation that started, and very special relations. Could you tell us about this strong bond, personal bond, and of course the friendly outcome out of it?
I think the personal friendship between Prime Minister Nehru and President Nasser is almost legendary, and certainly all Indians and Egyptians of my generation, and I'm sure that even later generations would recall it and not forget it.
Of course.
I think both our countries had just become independent. We in 1947, and then you had the revolution in 1952. And I think slowly across several other countries in Africa and Asia, there was this awakening coming about, and uh, independence struggles in many countries were becoming more intense. Prime Minister Nehru and President Nasser were among the founders of the non-aligned movement. The non-aligned movement represented a different force during the 50s, 60s and 70s and even later. If you see it against the backdrop of the Cold War global architecture that had emerged, there were these two blocks, and then you had the non-aligned movement representing largely newly independent countries who did not want to be aligned with either of the two blocks, and who had a strong desire to assert their strategic autonomy in world affairs. Undoubtedly, the non-aligned movement played a very, very important role during those decades. And I think in the context of the India-Egypt relationship, the legacy that we have has continued, and that is of close cooperation, consultation and coordination on issues of mutual interest. In terms of the relevance of the movement, I think the basic premise of strategic autonomy is still very much valid, and the forum allows the members to stake out their positions on issues of interest to them, and of course the priorities naturally change. So it is not just peace and security, but we are talking about issues such as energy, climate change,
economy,
intellectual property rights, etc. And to that extent, I would say that the non-aligned movement still has a relevance. Of course, over time, new groupings have come up. Several other multilateral fora have emerged. And the non-aligned movement must address contemporary issues as well as issues of the future, and tailor itself to the new realities. But if we are broadly agreed that the international global system needs reordering, that the United Nations system needs reform, then I think the non-aligned movement continues to have a validity, continues to have relevance of its own.
Of course. So the relationship after even the death of untimely death of Nehru continued between President Nasser and the famous Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the late Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and still the chemistry continued, as we could say, and still the friendship went. And so we can talk about the cooperation at that time between Egypt and India. Of course, we know that there was a military cooperation, but also cooperation on political positions, on industrial conditions, on agriculture. I think there was a strong ties at that time that has been done, right, sir?
I think through these 6-7 decades, India-Egypt relations have continued to be characterized by warmth, goodwill, shared interests, and cooperation in different fields and sectors, and that is one of the major health and life indicators have improved. Neonatal mortality rates have dropped. A national health mission has been revamped to tackle disease control, prevention and surveillance. Incidence of communicable diseases has come down. India has been polio and tetanus free. for the last 4-5 years. But the critical challenge is to ensure that economically weaker sections of society and those living in rural areas have access to affordable healthcare. Technological advances have helped in the sense that you have things like telemedicine.
Yes.
So through that you are able to consult physicians or
Senior consultants.
Who are working in cities in specialty and super specialty hospitals. Just last year, a very, very ambitious program has been rolled out, which is called Ayushman Bharat. Literally translated into English, it would be Long Life India. And the objective of this is to provide about 500 million Indians who do not have insurance the means to get treatment in the secondary and tertiary sectors of healthcare. The idea is that they should be able to get treatment even in private hospitals, and it guarantees, I think, about US dollars 7,200 equivalent to people who will come under this scheme. About 6,000 private clinics and hospitals are already participating in this, and about 1.4 million Indians have already benefited from the scheme which was rolled out last year. Effort is being made to publicize this scheme, to ensure that people register for it and are able to, and those who fall into the criteria are able to take advantage of it. Alongside, what has been happening is that prices of critical drugs and medical devices have been capped, and campaigns have been undertaken to spread more information about health awareness. Of course, with economic development, the government is also increasingly allocating more resources for healthcare. But all of this is really a work in progress. The scheme which I talked about, Ayushman Bharat, has the potential to really be a game changer. And the effort is to try and get more private clinics, more private hospitals into it. And also at the same time to spread the net to as many people as possible who qualify for this scheme.
So this is the most important pillar, which is health, and the second pillar, in order to improve the life and times of the impoverished, is education. Education, you have very prestigious universities and colleges that matches even the highest standards of Western education. For example, the Indian Institute of Technologies, which are allocated all through us, between 10 to 12 of these are present in India, with the most competitive exams of admission. And so also there is also the Indian Management Institutes, which are also a great challenge for the students to pass through. And so you're graduating every year thousands of very experienced and intelligent students who are enriching the market of economy and enriching the industry and education with these talented children or students. But when we're talking about still also the impoverished, which is a big problem, to reach the rural areas to do education. How are you able to solve this problem so that we can also copy that in our country as well? I mean, to reach the rural areas where there are a lot of people who have high IQ, and high prospects of intelligence, and we need just the chance or the glimpse of hope.
Let me begin by saying that I do not wish to be prescriptive, because I think each country has its own specific set of problems, but certainly I think all of us developing countries can learn from each other's experience and,
of course, sir. Of course.
And benefit. Distance learning has been there in India from 1962, and initially the form or the medium for that was really the post office. Lessons were sent through the post, and of course examinations were conducted in certain centers. Slowly came the television age, and then the television was utilized to conduct or to simulate classroom environment, and you had teachers coming and giving lectures or talks, and some of these channels are still working. We have a national television has certain dedicated channels devoted completely to education. But with the internet age, a more effective technological intervention has come about, and that is you have several self-learning portals that are there. One of them, for instance, offers about 2,000 different courses, and now in India you have several of these. The other remarkable thing which is happening is that the content providers, including the traditional textbook publishers, have been digitizing content. And once it is digitized, it is easier to access it, and also cheaper. So what we are trying to do is to use a combination of these systems to increase the outreach and ensure that people in the remote areas have access to quality education. It is of course also necessary that when we talk about all this, we must also bridge the digital divide, because there are still sections of the population that, especially in rural areas, that do not have as good access to the internet. So obviously the infrastructure must also improve at the same time. We are also focusing on something else, and which is I think equally relevant, is that are the people who are graduating, do they have the relevant skills to cope and to find gainful employment in the kind of economies that are evolving.
So supply and need, right?
I mean, whether they're being equipped with the requisite skills.
Yes.
And therefore we have flagship programs like Skill India, etc., which are trying to address this issue, while at the same time the universities and also the distance learning providers or these portals and all that have come up, they are also constantly reviewing the curriculum, the content that they are providing.
So this is very important, because I think with education, India has become a superpower in technology. Was this the only reason, education, but or also something else as well in the success of this recipe?
Well, I presume that you are referring to the IT sector, which India has become very closely identified with the IT sector. The IT sector in India has been growing at about 30% annually from 1993, and the total revenue it generates today, both in terms of domestic revenues and export revenues, are about $167 billion. I think it came about because we had a very large pool of trained manpower. Some coming out of the IITs and the engineering colleges, etc., that were established through the 50s, 60s, 70s. We also had the largest number of English-speaking people. I think a combination of this, coupled with the fact that the Indian economy started to open up in 1993, and the Indian entrepreneurs very rapidly connected to the world economy and used the opportunities that were available to them. Policy-wise, I would say that several initiatives were taken through the 1980s, 1990s, and those have very much continued. We have now schemes like Digital India, Startup India, and which are very actively supporting the IT sector. We were really talking about education. Now, I think there are 2,000 startups in the what they call the education technology sector alone. Mm-hmm. And similarly, there are startups catering to different sectors, which are revolutionizing the way business is being done, from healthcare to accounting to services of different kind. And the perception of India as a cheap source of low quality products, I think that is outdated. The focus really now is more on innovation, and that is what the Indian tech companies are actively pursuing.
Yes. So I think we'll talk more about India and Indian-Egyptian relations, but after the break.
Yes, back again, word of info, and you can call us at 2578-9407.
In fact, now they say that...
Yes, so back again, word of info with His Excellency Ambassador Rahul, Kulshreshth, Ambassador of India in Egypt, and Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University.
We have a strong communication between Egypt and India, which is the Egyptian the Bollywood movies. The Bollywood movies are a great. I know they admire it all over the world, but the Egyptians have a very soft spot towards the colors, towards the drama, towards the actors. They know all the actors, the old, the new, the newer generation. They love them. They are very emotional with them. They love their songs. And as I was telling you off air, that when Mr. Amitabh Bachchan paid his first visit to Egypt in 1980s and visited the Egyptian museums, almost all the Egyptians went to the Egyptian museum, making a record of those who visited the museum on that day. So there was an idea that started 7 years back between the Indian embassy and Egypt, that is in Indian embassy in Cairo, which is called India by the Nile. And through it, there has been sort of a strong culture, 2 or 3 weeks or a month, where there is a strong cultural cooperation between India and Egypt, where the Indian embassy brings in famous actors, famous shows. It goes around not only in Cairo, but involves Ismailia, Alexandria, and other cities. And there is shows, there is food festival, there is everything that India can carry abroad is well demonstrated and shown in this strong, beautiful cultural festival. So it's your first year here, sir, and you brought us a lot of beautiful surprises. So how was India by the Nile this year?
Well, this was the 7th edition of India by the Nile. The India by the Nile festival is somewhat different, and I think it is unique because it is outside of the cultural exchange program that we have at the government level. It is more of a public-private partnership project in which the Ministry of Culture of Egypt and our embassy, we provide logistical and administrative support. but a private Indian company, Teamwork Arts India, they curate the festival and they put it together. So that is what is really unique about this venture. And the fact that now we just concluded the 7th edition a few days ago shows that the idea can be replicated, and it is something that can be done successfully. What Teamwork Arts tries to do is to present in every festival, every edition of the festival, glimpses of Indian culture, of the diversity and the heritage. So this year, for instance, we had they had brought a group of Odissi dancers, and for a long time, I think the Odissi, which is a classical dance performance, had not been showcased in Egypt. They also brought along the legendary percussionist and Grammy Award winner Viku Vinayak Ram, and his group, who are called 3G because both his sons and his grandson form a part of that troupe. And we had a young singer, Harpreet, who is described as having become the voice of poets across languages and generations. Harpreet sings Sufi songs as well as traditional Indian folk music. Of course, yoga and Bollywood workshops were very much there. There was also a film festival.
And yoga as well this year as well?
Yes, yoga was very much there.
Yes.
There was
also in great demand, right?
Well, yes, yoga continues to be very popular. In fact, our cultural center in Zamalek conducts regular workshop classes on yoga.
It's a very good sports for meditation, really, and kicking out negative thoughts, right?
Well, yoga has become popular all over the world, and 21st June, as you know, is celebrated as the International Day of Yoga. We also had a food festival and 2 seminars. One was a business seminar and one was a No India tourism seminar. On the 15th of March, as part of the India by the Nile, we observed an India Day in Port Said, where the 3G group and Harpreet performed, and a yoga workshop was also conducted, and 2 Indian films were shown. I was very satisfied and with the response of the Egyptian audiences, and to them really we are grateful for the warmth with which they have received the festival through these last 7 years.
The festival actually is becoming an attraction for Egyptians, waiting for it every March, and especially that maybe 2 or 3 years back they brought in the famous Amitabh Bachchan, who has a very soft spot towards Egypt, which he always declares anywhere in the world he travels to. And of course the companies, the dancing companies, and the activities that you have just mentioned, sir, about the idea of how Egyptians see Indians with their friendly ties really increases very much. So we talked about the cultural cooperation, we talked about the Bollywood movies, we talked about the historical perspectives, but we want to finish our program with the talk about the economic cooperation now and tomorrow, because I believe that there are a lot of business, Indian business investing here in Egypt, with a lot of factories, as we were talking. They're almost a small but strong community of professional Indians who are living in Egypt, of 4,000. Usually they are working in Indian factories and Indian business over here. So could you tell us about the thriving cooperation, economic cooperation between Egypt and India?
Well, let me begin by saying that as we had discussed earlier, relations between India and Egypt have traditionally been very warm, friendly, and we've had cooperation in several sectors. His Excellency President Sisi visited India twice, and
also he visited when he was the Minister of Defense as well.
Right. And our leaders have decided to create a new partnership for a new era, which is built upon three pillars. One is political and security cooperation. The other is cultural cooperation, including exchanges at the people-to-people level. And the third pillar is economic cooperation and scientific and technological collaboration. In the last 5 years, we've had several visits at the ministerial level. And this again demonstrates the eagerness of both the sides to take the relationship to a new level. We have about 50 Indian companies who are active in Egypt. Of course, the number of registered Indian companies is even more. But about 50 of them are extremely active and established here. And they are across a range of sectors, from chemicals to packaging, pharmaceuticals, hospitality industry. The Indian investment in Egypt is in excess of $3 billion. The largest single investment is, of course, that by TCS Sanmar in Port Said, which itself is about $1.5 billion. The Sanmar Group has just finished its second phase expansion. And the positive thing is that a couple of other companies are also actively considering their own second phase expansion. So I would think that Indian investment, the cumulative Indian investment in Egypt, would increase in the coming years. I think as the Egyptian economy has stabilized and Egypt is on a positive growth path now, I also see Indian companies coming to Egypt and scouting for opportunities. I've also noticed in the 8 months that I've been here that Indian companies have been participating very actively in trade shows and exhibitions. And that to me again is a very good sign. For instance, I think there was a trade show related to construction. For the first time ever, Indian companies were present. Similarly, Egyptian business delegations have been going to India. Just last month there was a delegation from the Federation of Egyptian Industry who had gone to India. So on the whole, I would say that I'm optimistic that our trade level, which is currently about $3.68 billion, and India is Egypt's 10th largest business partner, should increase. And similarly, I'm optimistic that Indian investments in Egypt will increase. I may also mention that 3 Egyptian companies have made investments in India, the El Saweedi Group,
yes, I heard
Tapsi
that.
Coatings and another. And that to me again is a very, very good sign, because I think the more mutual investments we have, I am sure that it will also impact in a positive way on the trade turnover.
Yes, and I guess that there is also a mutual cooperation between the Indian embassy in Cairo and the Egyptian embassy in New Delhi. I think there is a lot of connections and communications as well, definitely, right?
Yes, we do keep in touch, not just the embassies, but also with, for instance, our embassy here, we interact very actively. We interact very actively with GAFI and other, and the local chambers of commerce and industry, and I'm sure the Egyptian embassy in New Delhi does likewise.
Of course. Sir, really thank you very much for your time. Definitely you've been a great host for us, informing us about the magnificent India, the India that we love and we like, and the India that we feel we are part of this strong, well-bonded friendship. And if you may kindly promise us that you will come again in our program to tell us more about Egyptian-Indian relations.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure, and I would be delighted to come back again.
Thank you very much. And by this we come to the end of Word of Info with His Excellency Ambassador Rahul, Kulshreshth, Ambassador of India in Egypt. Dr. Amr Mabrouk, Professor Plastic Surgery at Ain Shams University. Dua Mohammed at the controls. I'm Najla Naguib. See you next Thursday, same time, same station, FM 95.4.